I started playing baseball when I was 6 years old, and one of the things I really enjoyed, especially at a young age, about playing the game was the opportunity to engage with my father. And the reality of being able to do that was so special. And then over the years, the way you can engage people and the opportunity to be with people that maybe you no more would have expected to be with, but the game of baseball brought you together, was really cool. I grew up in the Christian home. Both of my parents were saved. My dad was saved in high school. My mother was at a younger age. And we grew up going to Coral Ridge Presbyterian, which was Dr. Kennedy's church. And my dad was a varsity football coach there. And so I kind of grew up in the church, having the Bible classes and whatnot. And I knew at a very young age that I was in need of a Savior. I was very aware of that. And so I came to faith in Christ at 6. I was very young. And subsequently what happened is like you grow up in this Christian environment, and you've been taught the stories, and you've been in the Bible studies, and you've heard it, and sometimes there became this like calloused like feeling that, you know, I've been here, I've heard this story before, and you start to lose track of the details, and it becomes kind of foggy. And inevitably what happened was, as you walk through life and as we experience things, it's like God, you know, gets our attention and makes us realize, remember all those things you were learning about me? Well, here is your ability to take conceptually what you know and tie it to the heart. Everybody has a story, right? We all have stories, we all have journey, we all have things that we're going to go through that sometimes is, you know, not always the most comfortable. And then obviously there's times where you're on the mountaintop experience. And so for me, certainly the beginning of my professional career was kind of that mountaintop experience where I was drafted. Now I get a chance to go out and play. My first game was actually down in Florida at the Marlins Stadium, which is where I saw my first game as a kid. I grew up in South Florida. And so to be down there competing in a stadium that I remember going to as a kid and have family and the whole deal was really, really special. I was off and running. I ended up hitting .321 that year in the short stint that I was there. I came back the next year and led the team in hitting. And there were some things in my game that certainly were weaknesses, like anybody. And I think at that time, given the position that I played, the concern was power production. And so I'll never forget, 07, Soriano was signed, and some different things happened in my career when he was signed. He started in center field. Opening day, it was Soriano leading off. I was hitting 2-hole, and Derek Lee was behind me at 3. And he ended up getting hurt early in that year. And when he got hurt, they ended up feeling like with his legs it would be a better fit for him in left. And so here's this young kid, Soriano just signed this big contract, and here's this young kid who basically now, I couldn't play center, where do we put him? And so that was kind of the beginning of the end for me there in Chicago. And I'll never forget being in 08, finishing the year on the playoff roster, getting a start in the division series, and the next year hitting 300 in spring training, and then being faced with the reality of going back to AAA. And it was really hard, and I didn't really accept it really all that well. But it was really unique and interesting to me because it was almost like God had a sense of humor. It was Kosuke Fukudome, who was signed out of Japan to come play for the Cubs, kind of starting that derailment of my career. And I remember sitting in my car in 08, even when I was in minor leagues, and I'm like, Lord, like what else do I have to do? Like I've literally done everything I can, and yet here I am, and this isn't right, and this shouldn't be happening, and all these things. Like I don't even know if I want to play this game anymore. I remember sitting in my car, like literally crying at one point because I was so emotionally over the whole thing. And it was now, you know, you look back on it, and it was 2 years later that I was in Japan, and I remember standing on that line the first opening day and looking at all the people and kind of tearing up because I knew that somehow God was doing something special. And it didn't make sense to me back in 08. It was really hard to even come to grips with going to Japan because I felt like somehow I was giving up on what I'd worked so hard for. But after all of those experiences kind of led one thing to another. The next thing you know, I was standing in Japan trying to hit a forkball. But it was in that moment I remember God told me, He's like, the very ground that you're walking on, I put it here. And these people, I love them and I care about them, and these are my people, and regardless of where it is that we are, I created this. So whether it's America or it's Japan or anywhere else on the globe for that matter, like this is where I want you, and it's okay, I'm here with you. And so there was such a peace when I arrived. There was always that drive to continue to succeed, and then certainly the power and presence of the Spirit and the peace that I felt. And that year was just incredible. I mean, it was like a honeymoon phase of our 6 years there. just engaging a new culture and being able to meet new people. I remember sitting around the lunch table one day with the guys, and I'm like, man, here's this redheaded dude that grew up in South Florida, sharing a table with a guy who grew up in the middle of Japan, doing it totally different, but here we are together. And to just the performance on the field matched with the experience in such a way that I couldn't have ever written it up that way. And I remember sitting, it was in October, and I remember sitting in Tokyo, and I was right on the cusp of being able to break the single season hit record that was held by Ichiro Suzuki. And to even go through what that even looks like, I mean, you could be talented, you can have all the gifts, but for the balls to find the hole and everything to go the way it needs to go, you have to really, as a believer, you have to understand that it's much bigger than you. And so I remember sitting there, and there was all this attention from the media and all these different things, and I almost felt this pressure that if I did not succeed in that moment, that I was a failure. Because now I'm sitting here able to do this, and if I can't do this over the last week of the season, I've somehow messed it all up. And God continued to work through that. And I remember Oki, who was my translator, walked down the dugout, and he looked at me, and I said, man, this is so much bigger than me. I can't make this about me, because when I do, I'm not going to be able to do it. And he didn't understand. And I remember the particular at bat that I ended up breaking the record. It was bases loaded, and we were in the middle of a pennant race, and I remember just this freedom came over me that this isn't about you trying to get this hit, this is about you trying to help your team. And so when I finally let that go, and it was about driving these runners in, all I was trying to do was knock my guy in from third. I got a 2-0 change up, base it up the middle. And so that really kind of set the foundation within Japan of breaking that record. And the team I was playing for was very visible, and the national recognition it got. And it just opened up so many doors to be able to share and to just live it out. And live it out meant there were some tough times too. Sometimes that maybe I didn't necessarily always handle it the right way, but more reason to allow people to understand the need for Christ. It culminated at the end of that year, and there was a lot of different events that led up to it. And we ended up getting eliminated from the playoffs. And because we were eliminated from the playoffs, it was like a day or two before the Franklin Graham was hosting a festival in Osaka. And when we were eliminated, it presented the opportunity to go share the testimony. And I remember sitting there spending time with Mr. Franklin Graham and just looking back over the year and just so amazed at like how God had unfolded everything. And I felt like so ill-equipped to get up in front of 10,000 people and share. But I was like, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, I'm going to do it. So I went out there and I shared, and at the end of it, I remember people walking forward in like Tigers gear and the whole deal. And it was like, man, at that moment, I became really emotional, because it was like God was telling me, hey, listen, I know that it's not been the road that you anticipated, but it's the road that I have for you. If you're out there and you're watching this, I think the biggest thing that I take away from the gospel and what it presents is that we all have this commonality. We all have this need for something to be bigger than ourselves, because if it's left to ourselves, so oftentimes we're going to mess it up inevitably. And there's going to be those moments where our identity is so wrapped up in all of the things that we do that when the struggle that this world presents is there, we don't know where to turn. What the Lord does, the Creator God does for us, is He presents a way out. He presents hope, and He presents a future for us. I was a baseball player, and as a fielder, we would wear a glove, right? And with that glove, the only way that glove could fulfill its purpose is with a hand in it. And the glove sitting off to the side by itself was just that, it was just a glove. But the only way it could fulfill the purpose was with the hand in there. And for us, God can be that hand in our lives to help give us purpose, to help give us direction. And He says in John 3:16, lastly, He says, for God so loved the world. So it's not just one culture, it's not just one country, but He loved the entire world, that He gave His Son, that whoever would believe in Him will have everlasting life. It's that simple. The gift is set there before us. All we have to do is believe. And it will help us in a way to have this identity that supersedes self. And the freedom that comes in that is a joy that you cannot explain unless you've experienced it. I am Matt Murton, and I play for Him.